Risk characterization is the outcome of an analytic deliberative process. Its success depends critically on systematic analysis that is appropriate to the problem, respond to the needs of the interested and affected parties, and treat uncertainties of importance to the decision problem in a comprehensive way. Success also depends on deliberations that formulate the decision problem, guide analysis to improve the decision participants' understanding, seeks the meaning of analytic findings and uncertainties, and improve the ability of interested and affected parties to participate effectively in risk decision process. The analytic deliberative process must have an appropriately diverse participation or representation of the spectrum of interested and affected parties, of decision makers, and of specialists in risk analysis and instead. 4. Those responsible for a risk characterization should begin by developing a provisional diagnosis of the decision situation so that they can better match the analytic deliberative process leading to the characterization to the needs of the decision, particularly in terms of level and intensity of effort and representation of parties. 5. The analytic deliberative process leading to a risk characterization should include early and explicit attention to the problem formulation, representation of the spectrum of interested and affected parties at the early stage in imperative. 6. The analytic deliberative process could be mutual and recursive. Analysis and deliberation are complementary and must be integrated throughout the process leading to risk characterization. Deliberation frames analysis, analysis informs deliberation, and the process benefits from feedback between the two. 7. Each organization responsible for making risk decisions should work to build organizational capability to conform to the principle of sound risk characterization. At the minimum, it should pay attention to organization change and staff training effort. There might be required 2 ways of improved practice by learning from experience, and to both costs and benefits in terms of organization, mission, and budget. According to the idea of the committee, in the iterative analytic deliberative process, there are 3 groups of people who make the inputs and output. 1. Public official or the designated decision makers. 2. Analytic experts such as natural and social scientists. And 3. The interested and affected parties to the decision. They are interact within each of the talks leading up to risk characterization. Deliberation frame analysis and analysis inform deliberation. The analytic process includes various ways of reasoning and drawing conclusions by systematically applying theories and methods from natural science, social science, engineering, decision science, logic, mathematics, and law. The deliberative process includes the method by which people build understanding or reach consensus through discussion, reflection, persuasion, and other form of communication. Both of the process allow for interaction across different groups of experts and between experts and others. There are 2 good points of the proposed idea of the committee. The first is the participation of the interested and affected party, which moves the decision making to the public arena, which is often conceived as a prospect of physical harm and degenerated its dimension of human minds and societies. The second is the dynamic of definition of which the scientific and social knowledge are relatively uncertain. The affected parties should have an informed choice no matter what they choose. I wonder this point. The point is, I wonder whether the society has the resource and mechanism for dealing with these conditions, especially in case of developing countries, in which the scientific knowledge comes from outside. How could the people in this country have an informed choice? Could they choose a way of life without science? Thank you.
Thank you. It's time for a question. Okay, so maybe we'll do the questions and discussion at the tea break. Thank you very much. So I think everyone deserves a little tea break. So please come back in 1 or 2 minutes. Will people take their seats, please? We're going to start. And just so that you know, the people in the room, the books at the back are for free distribution. So you can take copies, I think. Yep. Okay, so we're going to start. The next paper is by Oh Kwon from South Korea on the current state of embryonic stem cell research in Korea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. My name is Ivo from South Korea, and I will briefly introduce the current state of embryonic stem cell research in Korea and the reason why the Korean people support such a kind of research. Look at this. No pointer? Okay. Before September 2001, the officially usable sources of stem cell line and as such in the screen, and from them 3 stem cell making institution from South Korea. You know, from this slide you can notice the advancement in such a field of Korea. So, what's the background of the development of stem cell research in Korea? First one is we have many IVF in vitro fertilization clinics, over 200 before then, and now about 100, because by the new law, Bioethics and Biosafety Act, the IVF clinics have to register in a government agency, and with the decline of the birth rate, the number of IVF clinics decreased. Second, we have well-trained surgeons and IVF experts and scientists. The third, these IVF clinics, most of them are private clinics, so we can see severe competition among them. The last one is governmental support. The government made the Stem Cell Research Foundation since 2002, and for this year, they give $800 million for biotech budget and $20 million United States dollars for stem cell research. And why Korea supports stem cell research? This is relatively advanced technology than other countries like that. Second, we hope to dominate the future market. And we have star player scientists like Hwang Woo-seok, I will introduce you, and humanism to the sick, handicapped people. It functions as a good alibi for ethical concerns. And different philosophical or religious attitude from the Western countries. In Korea, embryo or fetus doesn't granted as value like human individual. And so, Dr. Hwang, the most famous scientist in Korea, and his colleagues, he a big hit. Last year, February, in the famous journal Science, he reported the first established stem cell line from cloned embryo by somatic cell nuclear transfer technique. This research used nucleus and egg from the same donor, a young woman. And this year, he and his team established effective recipe for extracting stem cells from cloned embryo. This research reported in Science May this year. This research used nucleus and eggs from different donors. It realized the practical use of this technique. And this August, they cloned dog for the first time in the world, named Snoopy. This is the embryonic stem cell line from cloned embryo last year in Science. This is a picture of his team in his lab. And you can watch the character under the picture. Unwatched question have been raised over how Hwang Woo-seok laboratory obtained human egg. Nature, 3rd June 2004. This is the picture of the stem cell and embryoid body made from stem cell line this year, Science. He is Dr. Hwang with his dog, the first cloned dog named Snoopy. You can see the same dog, mother and the cloned dog. And the dog cloning have been thought as impossible among many scientists, but he succeeded in cloning dog. So, and therapeutic cloning legally permitted by Bioethics and Biosafety Act since 2005, this year. But Korean Bioethics Association appealed and questioned his research last year. The content of the question is resource of egg, resource of research fund, and the appropriate procedure of informed consent from egg donors, appropriate IRB surveillance of the research, and like authorship. We have guidelines and laws for stem cell research in Korea. The first one, Bioethics and Biosafety Act, stipulated in December 2003, enforced since 1st January 2005, this year, permit therapeutic cloning but ban reproductive cloning, and ban the commercial use of egg or sperms. Demand governmental registration and permission for embryonic stem cell research. And informed consent, IRB, review, protection of privacy and safety of the related persons is stipulated in this act. And we have made draft guideline of the Stem Cell Research Foundation in 2002. In that guideline, we set moratorium for therapeutic cloning and formulated ethics committee and other necessary procedures. And last year, we updated the guideline of the Stem Cell Research Foundation. And so, you can see the picture, Pride of Korea. Dr. Hwang is now respected by almost the Korean people as Pride of Korea and National Treasury of Korea. And Dr. Park, the other person, extracted stem cell from spare frozen embryo last year. Dr. Hwang now 24-hour guarded by a special team from Korean National Intelligence Service, KCI, because he is as a kind of national treasury, and the government very well cared him, and he is a very, very valuable person to Korean. So he is protected, guarded by the special team, 24 hours, like the president. You know, president and the prime minister, the same guardians. Dr. Hwang shook hands with famous singer, dancer Kang Won-nae. He was broken his back in a motorcycle accident. This is a picture, strenuous. And he is a hope for the handicapped person like him. Ironically, the group of his name, when he sing a song and dancing, and he made the singing team, the name of the team was a clone. I don't know the reason. So, background of stem cell fanaticism in Korea. Ignorance of the sciences and technology. I think it's a very severe thing among the lay people. In Korea, lay people doesn't know much about the science and technology. And the Korean education system, science field and humanistic field is separated from high school days. So, and many opinion leader groups from the humanistic studies doesn't know much about science and technology. So, many handicapped patients give up their rehabilitation therapy, hoping Dr. Hwang will cure us. And second, nationalism and patriotism. In Korea, great scientific achievement is granted as a contribution to the country. You know, the Korea is ruled by the Japanese government and experienced so many invasions from China and Japan, old days. So, and we feel great achievement is contribution to the country. And second, many people, President Bush is against the stem cell research. So, for radical groups, radical leftist group against the United States in Korea, stem cell research is a kind of patriotic work for Korea because George Bush is against that. And then, mass media propaganda. You know, most of mass media always need a hero or legend. Dr. Hwang is very enough to be made as a hero and a legend. He achieved great work for 3 times, only 2 years. So, and the work to many Koreans will be very helpful to the handicapped or very sick person. So, and mass media try to make him a hero. And the last one, economism. We can do anything if the economies goes well, because now the economic state of Korea is bad, not so good as before. So, and yesterday question, why Korean girls really donate their eggs? The selling eggs or sperm is banned by the law in Korea, but many Korean girls want to donate his egg for the research. I think the reason is they were brainwashed by the mass media, and they think egg donation as a kind of patriotism and humane behavior like blood or organ donation for the patient support. And they know, although it is very hard, it would give some important meaning for their life. And they don't know or don't care about the risks involved. And like in most Asian countries, we have weak concept of privacy and human right, especially for such a kind of thing. And the tradition of self-sacrifice for more noble purpose of the community. Many Korean people, it's very noble and important to sacrifice for the purpose of the whole country or whole community. So, there's no way to stop the donation if they consent with sanity and fully informed. Now, the anti-America or anti-Western nationalistic groups sprouting in Korea, and the students demonstrated in the tank by shout, Yankee go home, maybe. And so, this cartoon showing economic crisis of Korea now. And so then we feel very bad and some crisis about the national economy. So, the Dr. Hwang stem cell research is great hope for our economic development. We will someday take over all over the world biotechnology market. It's our hope now. And so, it's protesting groups, NGOs, making legal for biotech monitoring and discussed the embryo research last month. But the mass media will not cover their stories and their argument seriously, but most mass media have much interest in the Dr. Hwang stem cell researches and other biotech research rather than ethical implication. Korean Catholic groups naturally against Dr. Hwang's research, but Dr. Hwang met Archbishop Chung, head of the Korean Catholic Church, 15th June this year, but there is no agreement. But he will go his own way, and the Catholics go his own way. But many Catholic believers think to support Dr. Hwang's research in Korea. Curiously. Conclusion. In the face of the insanity of nationalism and economism, can the bioethics or human rights and dignity will survive tomorrow? It's a very serious question, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. Nori first, and then Amir. Okay, then Heiko.
I'm Dr. Hen from Japan. Thank you very much for a very interesting story, particularly for a person who lives nearby. Would you mind telling me something more about the attitude of people toward fertilized egg or embryonic cell in Korea? Because in Japan, the Japanese ad hoc committee officially employs the Christian ideology, which means life starts at the fertilization. So I'd like to know more about the concept in your country.
Just comment. Okay.
Thank you very much for a very... That was a question, he says. Okay, I can go ahead. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. You said that the egg donation is, and this came up before also, is for patriotic reasons. Well, that's a very noble cause, and patriotism usually surfaces in times of crises. And there's no war going on right now, there's no famine, tsunami, etc. Are there any other manifestations of this patriotism rather than just egg donation by only females happening in Korea at this time? That explains this?
Yeah, but pardon, repeat once more in simple form your question.
There's other examples of patriotic acts by Koreans in the sake of medical science.
As I know, yeah, there is no case such like that. Okay, in Korea. But now in clinical trials, and many Koreans readily want to be involved in clinical trials, and some people waiting for the noticement of the clinical trials in a hospital. Yeah, but they will readily and sacrifice his body to the more noble purpose. Yeah.
I come from Germany, and I'm a Protestant Christian, and I like your opposition standpoint very much. And I would like to know, you write over 90% of the Koreans praise the success of Dr. Hwang. So I would like to know, what is the source of your opposition? What is, where is your oppositional standpoint grounded?
What is the position of my opposite position to the research? Exactly speaking, I'm not opposite to his research, and I am agree on the therapeutic cloning, and it is necessary for our medical purpose. It's my position. But in such fanaticism, you know, it's very hard to talk about the human rights involved and the procedural justification. Many procedural, you know, we have to keep in such a research, but I think to argue to keep the procedure, the right procedure, doing such a research is very hard in such a fantastic condition. I mean that. Okay.
Okay, briefly, please, young one.
I'm very appreciate your presentation. I know most of views from the public about the stem cell research. I would like to know more about the ethical field many ask bioethicists how to think about this. And also I know in your career, there are many Catholics, they go to church in nearly more than a half person go to church. And how do you think about regard their embryo as person or as human being or as something?
Okay. We have very few number of bioethicists in Korea, and a part of them is against such a research like therapeutic cloning. But small group bioethicists, including me, agree on the therapeutic cloning, but different position among the bioethicists in Korea. And second question, many Koreans believe in Christianism, but they go to church to pray for their health and their wealth in the current life, this life. Not many people don't interested in the heaven after life. So, and many Korean people, although even if he is a Christian or Catholics, and this kind of work will be helpful to the sick, they will agree. It's very different cultural situation from the other Western Christianism countries.
Okay, thank you very much for interesting news from Korea. Thank you. So the next paper is looking at another issue in Asian bioethics, Chastity Rai from the UK, but from India originally, talking about gender feticide. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Chastity Rai. I'm an ENT surgeon. I do a lot of human rights work as well and advise the Golden Temple. We do a lot of work on the Punjab as well. So medical science and technology has advanced considerably in the last 2 decades with obvious benefits and sometimes repercussions. And one of the repercussions has been in the determination of the gender of the fetus. This has led to a phenomenon called gender feticide in India, and particularly in northern India and Punjab. It involves not just medical ethics, but ethics across a number of different disciplines. To put the problem in context, the latest Indian census, 2001, shows that for every 1,000 children 0 to 6 years of age, there are 927 females. So, in about 10 years' time, there's going to be a problem. In the Punjab, there already is a problem. In the 1991 census, for every 1,000 young male children, there were 857 females, and the repercussions of that are now emerging as those children have grown to marriageable ages. In the 2001 census, it's grown even more dramatic to 1,000 males to 793 females. Determining the gender of the fetus, there are two main ways of determining this. One is amniocentesis, which is an invasive technique. And it was introduced, it was very beneficial in terms of gender. The medical profession could find sex chromosome-related genetic disorders, such as Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And you can sort of get reasonable amniotic fluid at 16 to 18 weeks of pregnancy. Now, the ultrasound sonography is a non-invasive technique. And a sonograph machine can cost about $11,000 to $45,000. At 15 weeks of pregnancy, there is a possibility of determining the gender. Inevitably, there are laws to deal with this. In India, in conformity with the increasing liberalization of society and the rights of women, abortion laws were introduced in 1971 called the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act. If the pregnancy is less than 12 weeks, then one doctor can make a decision, but if it's between 12 and 20 weeks, 2 doctors have to concur. And the reasons for aborting are as given. The continuation of pregnancy could be a risk, or there could be there have been a grave injury to her physical or mental health. And mental health is often interpreted quite liberally. For instance, in the UK, I know mental health clause was used to go blindly to start abortions because the possibility of depression. And then there's the failure of any device or method used by married couple for limiting number of children. The abortion law prohibits abortion for gender selection, but there's a loophole, as there is in every law. After a woman has determined, or a couple have determined the gender of the fetus, they don't have to tell the doctor officially what the gender is. They can demand officially on contraceptive failure. So there's a way around it. So what do we do next? We go to the genetic determination techniques and limit them. So in India, they introduced a law in 1994, recognition of this problem. Laboratories and genetic centers, genetic determination centers were stopped from determining the sex of a fetus. If you want to set up an ultrasound clinic, you have to go through a number of forms and bureaucratic procedures, and even no person shall conduct, that includes a couple, for instance, the woman herself, to determine, to seek any help to determine the sex of a fetus. The law often doesn't work in India, and it's a fact. You only have to go on the roads and see that driving, you almost think there is no law on the roads. But it's also a tendency, for instance, in India for some reason, in many countries, that if the law doesn't work, you try and tighten the law even further. So there was another attempt in 2003, Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Prohibition of Sex Selection Act, 2003, and the main extra point there was to stop in vitro sex determination was banned. The effect of this, well, 51,000 to 57,000 sex selection abortions took place in 6 years prior to 2001. So ineffective. And doctors cynically even justify that they're helping the population, stopping the population growth in India. Why is this happening? Well, there are cultural issues, as there are in many cultures and societies. There's a preference for a male offspring. And within Indian society, the female is often an economic burden on families, because there is, apart from the cost of bringing up the child, then there is the added cost of dowry. At one time, dowry was only in the upper middle class families, but it's seeped down to almost all stratas of Indian society now. And then once the dowry is given, then the woman leaves the family to go join her in-laws. Therefore, there is a total, there's a sort of the investment is a negative investment in terms of, if you just strictly look at that. Therefore, families try and deal with it by reducing the abort women. There used to be female infanticide, say about 100 years ago. It stopped, and now it's come to fetal feticide. Of course, this introduces a number of problems. It's not just a medical ethical problem. I think the discussion should rotate around the medical fraternity, the paramedical services, the role of the law, the role of the law enforcement agencies, the role of the state, the role of religious institutions, and the role of NGOs. It's a multidimensional problem, not just one institution. Now, the medical profession has not been very responsible in this. It's a lucrative market. For every reference that a doctor gives to an ultrasound clinic, there's 250 rupees the doctor gets as a kickback, and there's 3,000 to 5,000 rupees per abortion. Now, if you calculate that with 50,000 in the last 6 years, you can imagine the money the obstetricians have made in Punjab in 6 years. There's a poor litigation record in India in the medical profession. The doctors don't like going to court to give evidence against each other, and there's a lack of professional auditing in the general medical profession. There is in the very big institutions, but not in the general medical institutions. Compare, for instance, to the UK, where you must have heard of some recent problems. There was a pediatrician who was harvesting organs, cadaveric organs from dead children. Immediately there was a concern in the public. There's a revalidation process. We have to reevaluate our colleagues every year. There's a vigilant press, there's a responsive civil society, and there's a high standard of medical ethics across the board. And there is now a culture of reporting on other doctors discreetly, so that if there is malpractices, they don't really, you don't have to put forward your name, but you can inform the medical profession, the BMA, for instance. What about the paramedical and diagnostic services? What are their ethics? Well, they put $12,000 to $45,000 on a machine is quite expensive outlay in a country like India. Therefore, there has to be recovery of outlay, and there is considerable corruption with the police and the administration, things like that. Therefore, everybody turns a blind eye. It is my suggestion, for instance, that the law doesn't really work. So the sort of action that might be needed in a sphere like this is to control the number of machines. Now, India has a free market economy now. You may say, well, that's not a possibility, but countries do control certain areas of the market. For instance, they control defense production, they control communication industry, they can control many other sectors. Therefore, there is no reason why, if there's a significant problem which is emerging in the country, they cannot control machines like ultrasound machines and ensure that the ratio or the number of ultrasound machines in the public is directly related to the male-female ratio. And according to studies, there is no indication for a regular ultrasound scanning unless there is a medical indication. Law, well, paradoxically, the law was there to empower women to get abortions, and it has the inverse effect of increased abortions, and it's increased backstreet gender abortions, because reputable hospitals will not engage in this. Their doctors, consultants who work there, go to smaller clinics where the environment is not very healthy, there are diseases, etc., and there are a number of abortions end up with the female acquiring diseases from that, and some die. And again, it's an interesting thing in India that whenever there is a problem, society first tends to go to the law for the law to find a solution. And it's a recurring theme, whether it was the dowry or whether it's now this. The law is the first choice, but it's also the most inefficient, as we've heard in some of the best countries. The law is often an inefficient vehicle for delivering reforms in society, and it is even more non-functional in countries like India. Because law enforcement, let's look at law enforcement. It's a total failure. The police is often very corrupt, and there's a lack of incentive. And the country, for instance, law enforcement is not looking at the potential problems of this. In 20 years' time, India is going to have an excessive number of males, unmarried males, and this is just building up civil unrest in the country. Wars have been fought in the past between tribes, people, etc., to get women from other societies. Of course, India is not going to go engage in a war like that, but there's a possibility of internal unrest emerging out of a lot of unmarried single males. The brides are sometimes now, it's the problems already seen in Punjab. People are going out to other states, sometimes abducting women to marry, and sometimes buying them to marry because there now are not enough women in Punjab to marry. So what is needed is perhaps law enforcement attitudes have to change. Then perhaps there is a need for special units in the police. The dowry system, the dowry system led to violence against women, and eventually, after 20 years of failures, the law and law enforcement in the country realized that they need to set up special gender violence units in the police, which are dedicated to that, and it's begun to work in some of the cities. And there's no reason why they cannot set up feticide units in the police forces. The role of the state. The state is very important to our lives these days. Until about 100 years ago, the Indian civilization had an extraordinary system in which the state was irrelevant to the lives of people. Kings came and when the kingdoms, monarchs came, and people came from abroad and invaded the country, it didn't seem to matter at all. But now the modern state system encroaches the lives of everybody, and people are very much dependent on the state for solutions and for their lives. And therefore the state engages in finding solutions. They have what's called a enforcement authority on this, which includes a joint director of health and family welfare, an independent woman representing women's organization, and an officer of the law department of the state government. It's interesting now here that in India this is seen as a women's problem. It was women's organization who led this. Now, I would have seen it as a male problem. It's the men who are going to have a problem in future not being able to find women to marry, but in India, it's the women who are leading this problem, and it's the women, for instance, a woman is in Indian society, it's sometimes said it's a patriarchal society, but it becomes matriarchal after a certain period of marriage. And the women sort of almost control. They decide that there's a need for an abortion because a female child is a burden to the family. Therefore, it's not in the interest of women to stop this. Of course, educated women try this, but there isn't, unless there is a change in attitude and recognition, this is a much wider problem. And there's also, for some reason, there's a reluctance in the Indian state system to engage religious institutions and social welfare organizations from society. This is in vast contrast, for instance, to the country United Kingdom. 4 years ago or 5 years ago, renal surgeons realized that the Asian population, when we say Asia and UK, we talk about South Asia rather than Southeast Asia. The Asian population has a high incidence of diabetes, and as a result, also high incidence of renal problems. There's a need for kidney transplants, but Asians were reluctant to donate kidneys. So the medical fraternity decided the way ahead was to engage the state and religious leaders. There was a huge conference. They brought in all the religions, Asian religions, and asked them for help to engage, to try and convince their people that the renal transplant was not against their religion. Recently now, with the 7th July bombings in UK, there's a huge effort by the state to engage religions in dialogue and in consultation. But in India, for some reason, it seemed to be non-secular to engage religious institutions in the consultation process, etc. And paradoxically, the most effective institution has been the religious institution in dealing with this. The Golden Temple, the head of the Golden Temple, we have an equivalent of the Pope without the divinity and infallibility concept. He passed an edict in 2001 that feticide was against Sikh religion, and people could be excommunicated if they engaged in this. It's had a tremendous effect in the more religiously orientated Sikhs, but it hasn't had any effect in the rest of society, and interestingly, neither the state in Punjab, nor the NGOs, nor other systems incorporated or engaged the Golden Temple in a comprehensive policy. The NGOs in India tend to be usually very upper middle class or high society. They are often dislocated from the rest of society, and they tend to think very much in secular terms. Therefore, they have very little effect on society as such. The few NGOs that have been effective are the ones who've engaged general society in other fields. And unless the NGOs engage, unless there is a multidimensional problem, and you can see the problem, for instance, in a paper in which the summary suggestions by two very senior people who are determining state policy. Their summary suggestion is a move away from religious teachings and the advocacy of scientific, rational, and humanist approach. There's an obsession in high society in India that perhaps the Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment theory in India would work. And empowerment of women, but it is women's empowerment, the abortion law, which led to this. There is completely a contradiction in their approach and a conflict in their approach. So in conclusion, feticide is a major bioethical problem in India. It involves wider ethical issues involving medical, technology, state and society. The current policies are unworkable. The ethical problem needs to be recognized as a multidimensional problem. It needs multidimensional approach with civil society and religious institution participation. Amartya Sen, the economist, called these the missing women, and those the white young girls who in a way are missing from Indian society because they've been aborted. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for a question. Peggy, raise your hand up. Yeah. Can you use the microphone behind you?
Please. Oh, thank you. I just had a quick question about the women
getting the abortions, are you saying that it's women making the decision to have the abortion, or do you think there are other factors involved in women deciding to have an abortion?
Well, inevitably, the factors are cultural and economic factors, but the women are very strong in, they almost keep the family together in Indian society and share responsibility in what is going to happen in future. So women are voluntary participants in this. It's not that women see it as a problem against themselves. Most women voluntarily participate in this abortion.
I guess I'm saying that the decision to have an abortion by many women is not from their own individual choice, but the pressures of the male within the household. That's why in a couple of papers today, I've been sort of wanting to put up my hand and say that often we are putting lots of things on women. There was a paper before which said, you know, women, do more, do this, whereas a lot of these decisions, human rights and everything, are really male-female decisions in partnership, and males should have equal opportunity to have the education to participate in this sort of decision-making, rather than saying that it's almost a woman's choice to have an abortion. Thank you.
I entirely agree with you. This is what I'm saying, that in India what has happened is it's been women's organization who have been leading the battle, and I think it has to be seen as a common problem, but it's a male and female problem. It's not just one gender issue. It's not just the responsibility of women, but it's the responsibility of men as well.
I'm wondering the extent to which the easy availability of abortion to women in the early 70s was prompted by women's rights movements or the desire of India to keep its population down. Because we were working in a rural development program in Western India in the 70s, in the early 70s, and we were promised any kind of assistance as long as we would increase the numbers of people who would go in for abortions and family planning. And remember the times, you know, where people were, both men and women, were being dragged off the streets almost to be sterilized. And so I'm just wondering if that also was more the case rather than the women's rights issue.
Well, there is a cynical view in India that one of the reasons why this is not being tackled is the state is not very interested, because it is keeping the population down, and as I said, some doctors cynically say they're helping the state to keep the population down. It may be one of the reasons why realistic solutions are not being sought.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you. Thank you. So the next paper is by Samantha Pang. We jumped several papers which are being postponed till tomorrow. To Samantha talking on how Chinese and Japanese patients characterize a good nurse. Thank you. And Michiko is here too. We're here as both co-authors.
Thank you for this opportunity in presenting our study. After hearing the environmentalist concern of the global issues, actually we feel very much like the old wives creeping out of the kitchen and now sitting in front of you being cross-examined. And the topic why we are interested in this topic of the study, actually the conception of the idea come from a gathering in Japan, that in Nagano city, where a group of nurse atheists sitting together and been discussing about what kind of issues we need to deal with that are common concern of the in the Asian region. And we find that there are many papers coming out on having been examining about what is the good nurse. However, we find that there's a lacking of systematic study from the patient's point of view. So therefore, we developed this cross-national study. And we met several times actually in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, and we are going to meet again in Beijing in next month. So this is, I think every one of you may realize that there are different approaches or different emphasis in ethics. One in principles, and which emphasize actions, and virtue ethics emphasize the agent who perform action. And by virtues, I very much like McIntyre's definition as an acquired human quality and possession and exercise of which tends to enable us to achieve those goods which are internal to practices and lack of which effectively prevent us from achieving any goods. So we did try to go back to how we define ethical nursing, and I like Kelly's definition very much, is that when ethical nursing actually happens when a good nurse, so which is very much concerned about the quality of character, does the right thing. So it is very much about the action. So when a good nurse of character do the right thing, then this is ethical nursing. Anyway, when we go back to our reality in the clinical practice, very analogous to the 5 cardinal relationship in a traditional Chinese society, nurses actually has been working in a web of relationships. And I think it is not only true in Chinese, I think it's true internationally. We have to be in relation to the society, healthcare institutions, the practice, our profession, and of course the primary relationship is towards those under our care, that is the patients and the patient's family. And in this web of relationships, actually it emerged different role responsibilities. Like in relation to the society, we have to deal with the issue about sustainability of the healthcare, the mandate given to us in serving the people wholeheartedly, and in rescue the dying and heal the wounded. And in relation to the health institutions, is the institutional rules and regulations. In relation to the patients, we have the mandate in doing no harm, doing doing good to the patient, respect the patient's individuality, respect the human dignity, etc. Looking into this web of relationships with all the different kinds of responsibilities, actually, what we find is that nurses actually have to deal with difficult care situations where being good may not in concordance with doing the right thing. So I'll give you some examples of these difficult situations. We've been discussing about abortion, etc., and this is a real case that more and more often now happen in Hong Kong. 15-year-old girl left home, lived with the boyfriend, and then got pregnant and came to the A&E department and then asked for termination of pregnancy. So of course the doctor encountering this girl was saying that we cannot give you a termination of pregnancy, we need to see your parents. And then the doctor at the same time will ask the nurse to report the case to the police, because it is in Hong Kong, juvenile pregnancy has to be reported to the police. Also, it is illegal to have sex with an immature girl. And then when the nurse encountering the girl who is really emotionally upset and saying that she had voluntary sex with her boyfriend and she did not want to hurt him and did not want to put the boyfriend into jail, and then she said that if you insist to do that, I'll run away from the hospital. So is it really to the good for this girl if you run away? And then at the same time, the doctor will say that we as healthcare professionals will be abide by the rule of law. So this is one of the examples, being good and doing the right thing, how to choose. And there are other cases like, for example, very often is about protecting the terminally ill, to know about that actually he got the terminal illness. So all the family surrounding the patient saying that you have to not to tell directly the patient about it, that he's already in terminal stage because the patient is so vulnerable. And the patient was very suspicious. Why you as a nurse giving me the drug? I'm not really recovering from the disease. I seem to be getting worse. Are you giving me the wrong drug? And the nurse definitely know that the patient needs psychological care, but because the family prevent the nurse to attend to the patient's psychological needs. And there are other situations that the patient refuse drug. According to the patient rights, the patient have every right to refuse treatment. But for this patient, he got infectious disease like tuberculosis. So are we going to just let the patient have that right? Or we have also to look at the public health as well. The other issue about confidentiality, yes, for nurses we have to keep confidential of patient's information. This patient have AIDS, and he knew about that. He did not want to tell his wife about his problem. So for respecting patient's confidentiality, they're saying that okay, but how about the wife who is having intimate relationship with the patient? So these are some of the examples that within the clinical context, nurses inevitably face difficult care situations of how to be good and do the right thing. And that, of course, demands some kind of professional judgment. But at the same time, for our research team, we'll try to look at the issues from a different perspective, because we find that so far we have not really systematic study about how patients actually characterize the good nurse. So it is with this background and this context we conduct this study. And while we're discussing about which patient group we would like to do, because it will be patients in different countries. So eventually we come up with cancer patients. Why? Because these patients usually, when they start to have to know about them, their diagnosis, they need to undergo a series of treatments, which will be really very undesirable. And like surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, and sometimes they may also have the lifelong threat about being recurrent to this life-threatening disease. So we choose the cancer patients. And our approach is a narrative interview. So we ask the patients to tell us stories about their encounter with the nurses that they consider as good and bad, and give the full descriptions of the incidents. And narrative interviews, of course, have a very good way in capturing their views and also their values in a way how they construct this. They tell us the story, and at the same time they tell us why they consider that is good and bad. And it is a very good way in expressing their views, their meaning to that, and also at the same time to capture the patient's culture and also the social world. And because this is a cross-national study, and somehow we need to have some basis for comparison, so we have we use this kind of control application procedures. So make sure every country use the similar procedure to process the data. Would like to give you some of our observations from the data is that we find that the patients who tell us the story about good and bad nursing, usually these patients tell us that they are in a fragile stage. So it's in the vulnerable stage of illness. When they meet a good nurse, they experience positive transformation from the vulnerable state of being. And we further ask them why they find in meeting this good nurse, they have that change of positive change experience, and then they tell us about the virtues of these nurses and also the acts that these virtuous nurses performed, including pleasant manner, humaneness, presence, and clinical competence. And it is their using it and having it that make their acts performed. How about the bad nurses? It is very similar, the same group of patients, they encounter good nurse and a bad nurse. So when they are in such a vulnerable state, they met the bad nurse, it is adding burdens to the patient who is in a vulnerable state of being. And what they find is that these nurses are distant from humaneness and have abominable manners, emphasizing procedural accuracy, incompetence, lack of responsibility, not giving time, etc. For me, actually, after analyzing all these data, as a nurse, it really gave me a very hard blow to myself. I began to find that what I did sometimes to the patient actually is can be so hurtful that I did not realize. So after this study, I think I become better. So my concern here, of course, is about the similarity and the differences and the variability between the Chinese and the Japanese data. So I and Michiko have been discussing over the past few days how we are going to look at that. The similarity. These patients, no matter they are in Korea, in China, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, in Japan, they tell stories about the good nurse when they are in a state of vulnerable being. So some of the descriptions is like that. It's out of my intention. It's not my intention to get sick. I'm forced into the situation. I can do nothing about it. I'm disappointed, frightened, fearful, panic, loss of mind, confused, big blow, treatment is painful, falling into a pit. It's like a penalty to me. It's like a curse to me. So it made me regress to childhood. So it does not exhaust all the descriptions about their vulnerability. So it is in this kind of vulnerability, which is a common experience of all the patients who got cancer, disregard of their nationality. And when they meet the good nurse, they feel that the nurse has placed in the heart that gives them an experience of positive transformation. So this is how I find that we as nurses are somehow so crucial. And these are all the stories given to us by the patients, saying that they have the confidence, they got the courage, they are at peace. They're at peace with the mind, peace with the, feel secure and with some kind of stability. They feel more happy, they feel warm, they feel uplifted. They got the courage to receive the treatment, alleviate the suffering, alleviate the sense of guilt. Many of these patients really experience different kinds of guilt. The guilt of being, I've done something wrong in my past, so therefore it is God that cursed me, that put a curse on me, and I got cancer. After I got cancer, I cannot take care of my children. I cannot go to work, so and my family will be run out of money. So there are all kinds of guilt. Give them hope. And this patient, this description, I find it so beautiful. It say that when I got sick, I feel that I'm drifting away from the life force. And it is in meeting a good nurse, it seems that I'm in touch with the life force again, and I got hold of the rope that helped me to lift up again. How about the bad nurse? Again, it is very similar in the vulnerable state of being, but when they meet the good bad nurse, they add burdens to the patients. So there are all these burdens being expressed by the patients as a burdened heart. It makes the patient more worried, hurtful. Although they have something to express, they dare not to say so. They have all kinds of negative emotions because of the bad nurse, making them tense, making them feel more lonely, fearful, making them lack of the sense of security, lack of hope, feeling really don't know what to do. They do all harms to the patient, harmful to their to their dignity, adding pain to the patient, making the patient feel that they have do the wrong thing, and also have negative consequence of the on the patient, making the patient angry, feeling embarrassed, feeling being abandoned. So it is very much similar all across in a common experience of illness. And yet, we try to find some variability of the Japanese and the Chinese patients when in their stories of the good and bad nurses. And one thing very interesting is about the Chinese patients when they relate to the good nurses. They always say that, oh, it's so amazing. I never thought that they'll treat me just like my parents, like my mother, like my father, like my children. So they very much expected, or they describe the good nurse as their family member or as their friends. But for the Japanese patients, I think the line is more clearly drawn between the nurse as a professional or the family member. Although they do make analogy, but not that kind of crossing the boundary into the family circle and as a family member. And then one thing really amazed us, actually, amazed me in many ways when I pulled the Taiwan Chinese, Hong Kong Chinese, and mainland Chinese patient description of the qualities that they find in the good nurses. They're all the hearts. If you can read Chinese, you'll know that. If you cannot read Chinese, you still can know this is the hearts. It's the different description of the hearts. It's the benevolent heart, the parents' hearts, the patients' when I turn it into English, you lost all the hearts. The heart of responsibility, or the heart of concern, the heart of attentive to small things, the heart of being tolerance, the heart of compassion, the heart of worry, the heart of conscience, the heart of humility, genuineness, love, vitality, what's that? Being warm, okay, a warm heart. So there are all these hearts that reside, and so therefore we call it as the virtues residing in a cultivated heart. And they usually describe that these nurses use the heart, and it is the rich description of all these hearts that they that make them the good nurse. How about those hearts, nurses that they describe as fat nurse? And something I cannot go away with the Chinese, because it is so beautiful. Not having the heart. Usually they do not say that they are not having the heart. They are saying that they are forgetful. They are too busy. And then when I look at actually, it is Michiko who pointed out to me. Being busy in a Chinese word actually is getting the heart away. And being forgetful, again, it is getting the heart away. So it is in this kind of context that they are saying is the bad nurse, not having the heart. How about the Japanese patient's perception of the good nurse? It also has two very distinct components. One is about the virtues of the nurse, which is very much involved with the patients and family as the person. So it is being a good person, presenting herself as a person, and person in that sense is also a Chinese word. So being interested in the patient as a person and caring for the patient as a precious person. And also the professional compartment, which is very similar to that we got from the Chinese, the manner of self-respect, sense of responsibility, and clinical competence. What we find is that in the first presentation by Professor Yuan, saying that the Confucian virtues somehow has been neglected in China. And from our description of the patients, and I will say that they are very much in the hearts of the people when they are describing what they consider as good and bad. And we find very much of the cultural root in the Confucian ethics. But I will not go into that. The virtues of